No region of the world has been immune to terrorist attacks. Threatening security and stability, terrorism is incompatible with a nation's sovereign interest and objectives. Realizing the need for sovereign nations to share ideas for defeating terrorism, a new program is born. In June 2005, the United States Special Operations Command and the United States Strategic Command agreed to pursue a joint venture aimed at encouraging nations to develop their own counterterrorism programs consistent with their own national interest and cultures. Originally focused on the Global Rewards Information Program, the decision was made to gather foreign military advisors to discuss counterterrorism developments in their nation. Just 4 months later, at the United States Special Operations Command headquarters, MacDill Air Force Base, Florida, 82 representatives from 51 countries met for the first time to discuss this most important issue. Building on the momentum of the first conference, foreign representatives met again 1 year later, this time at United States Strategic Command, Offutt Air Force Base, Nebraska. More than 54 countries participated, recognizing that sovereignty in today's world is more threatened by terrorism and related threats than ever before. So just what is the work of Sovereign Challenge, and what did attending nations hope to gain from this conference? Sovereign Challenge is a collaborative effort of the United States Special Operations Command and the United States Strategic Command. This international engagement project focuses on the sovereignty of independent nations and how terrorism, in its myriad of forms, violates that sovereignty. By developing effective programs to prohibit and disrupt the ability of terrorists to train, recruit, and act within sovereign borders, nations create an anti-terrorist environment. The 2006 theme for the Sovereign Challenge Conference was the future of global terrorism.
And this event is really to drive and to build a forum where we can start to communicate and develop a common vocabulary, a common way of understanding what's right and wrong, and taking advantage in a proper sense of the opportunities that technology brings us, and leverage that for the good. Understand what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, and then band together as a global community to set those norms.
To understand the goals of Sovereign Challenge, we must first understand the nature of the threat. All nations have an interest in defeating terrorism, whether or not they have been physically attacked. Terrorist financing activities, training facilities, and extremist ideological intrusion are tangible and intangible threats to a nation's sovereignty. A nation must be able to protect and defend its own sovereignty from different forms of terrorist violations, and this defense should come from the nation's perception of the threat and its national identity.
The most dangerous threat to a nation's sovereignty is the violent, radical ideology that terrorists use to validate their actions and attempt to disseminate throughout a country. This ideology, with its intentional use of violence against civilians and its total disregard for even the most basic humanitarian law, is incompatible with all that in a civilized nation.
Ours is an interdependent world, but terrorism can impact each nation differently. This is why the face-to-face interaction at the second annual Foreign Military Attaché Conference was so valuable. Nations are encouraged to establish programs that counter their individual terrorist threats.
This isn't about one country. It's about all the countries. It is about each nation having the will and the resources to take the responsibility for its own people's security, providing for their common good, and protecting their nation's sovereignty, and ultimately contributing to the family of nations in a peaceful and responsible manner.
Information sharing was stimulated by small group discussions and provocative renowned speakers. Speakers for the 2006 conference in Omaha included Sir Richard Dearlove.
There is no question that in all our countries, what is key to dealing with terrorism is a coordinated, collective security response. And I think the most important lesson that I learnt in my previous post is how vital it is to join up one's domestic capabilities.
Speaking from experience, Sir Richard Dearlove promoted information sharing as a way to help combat terrorism. As head of the British Secret Intelligence Service, also referred to as MI6, from 1999 to May 2004, Sir Richard Dearlove experienced terrorism firsthand in 2000 when dissident Irish Republicans fired an anti-tank guided missile at his organization's headquarters, causing minor damage to the facility.
Most terrorist movements that we have had experience of have very clear political objectives. Palestinian movements, Irish movements, Basque, Tamils. And because they are, as it were, organizations with political objectives, those movements have what I would describe as handles which can be grasped and turned in negotiation if you wish to go that way. But I think what makes Al-Qaeda quite distinctive is that it has, in my view, no obvious political agenda. And I think that makes it incredibly difficult to deal with.
Author Dr. Fawaz Gerges discussed terrorism from a historical perspective, specifically addressing the question of legitimacy and its impact on the jihadist movement over generations. Dr. Gerges has written several books, including The Far Enemy, Why Jihad Went Global, and is a senior analyst for television news in the United States. While addressing the attachés, Dr. Gerges said, "The question for me as a student of social movements is, if Al-Qaeda cannot speak for jihadists, surely Al-Qaeda cannot speak for the Ummah, the Muslim community. If Al-Qaeda cannot represent the first generation of jihadists, the founding fathers of the movement who basically laid their theoretical and religious foundation of jihadism, surely Al-Qaeda cannot represent either the broader Islamic movement, let alone the Muslim community. It lacks the revolutionary legitimacy to do so." Sometimes combating terrorism forces a nation to address all aspects of its cultural values, including religion. A noted speaker on the impact of religion in public life, Dr. Pauletta Otis, shared her perspective on religion and the future of global terrorism.
This is one of the slides that I use to indicate that every one of the major world religions is involved in some way in violence, and we are familiar with it. We conveniently forget that it's a global phenomenon instead of a Middle Eastern phenomenon or a phenomenon that's resident in one locality and has the name of one ethnic group or one terrorist group.
Dr. Otis serves as a senior fellow in religion and international affairs at the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life, as well as a senior advisor for chaplains in the United States military.
But since religions tell you why you're born, why you die, what the purpose of life is, and why your grandmother passed away and what's happening to her afterwards, this is a matter they explain life and death and give us hope for today's life and for the future. Because they do that, then when we are in culture groups, and I'm a cultural anthropologist, as you've probably figured out, when we work in culture groups, we also know that it gives a reason for fighting, a reason for dying, and a reason for asking other people to die. It gives a reason for killing. Under what conditions you will kill or be killed becomes a primary question of all religions because of the value of life as defined by that particular religion. All right, religious violence is global, and the rules of just war and justice in war are related to religious practices. Just war is defined in all societies, in all religions, in a particular way. It's not that a religion is particularly more warlike than another, but every religion will have a reason why a war can be conducted.
In addition to this year's conference was a presentation on media and its impact on terrorism. The session began with a presentation from Dr. Corey Dauber, an associate professor of communication studies and of peace, war, and defense at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Dr. Dauber discussed the need to fight terrorism on two fronts, on the ground and on the nightly news. After her comments, she was joined by two journalists, Paul Wood of the BBC and Jeremy Young of Al Jazeera. Based on the lively discussion that followed, the debate over the media's coverage of terrorist acts will not be over soon. So how do we evaluate the Sovereign Challenge Conference? It is the sum of each attaché's experience in Omaha. For more than 3 days, dignitaries from many countries set aside external differences to focus on the terrorist threat. They attended briefings, they hosted discussion groups, they exchanged ideas and listened to each other's concerns. Most importantly, they created an informal network of foreign military advisors to dialogue on this fundamental issue, encouraging a strategic approach to the threat of worldwide terrorism. Commander, United States Strategic Command, General James Cartwright, addressed the participants on the last evening of the conference and encouraged them to critically think how to improve upon the progress made at the Sovereign Challenge Conference in Omaha.
As we move forward in this and set the agenda for the next iterations of these conferences, setting the goals and getting the people into these discussions that will help us frame the path that we want to take, get the right people in here and the right organizations in here to have the conversations at the right levels is going to be critical. There is no desire for groupthink in this, though. If we don't get your blood pressure up a little bit, we haven't done this right. If we don't get you to disagree a little bit, we haven't done this right. Okay? That's part of the exchange here. That's part of the value of the diversity of the people that are in this room. And we've got to take advantage of that. We have to capitalize on that and turn it into a strength. If we don't do that and we all just kind of nod our head, we won't get what we need out of this.
It is clear that there are many facets to countering terrorism and many causes that foster ideologies with the potential to damage a nation's individual security. The vision of Sovereign Challenge is that through an international network of nations operating in their own self-interest, a global anti-terrorist environment will become a reality. As long as there is terrorism, sovereign nations will support efforts to oppose terrorism's global influence and suppress its impact. Many will meet face-to-face, exchanging ideas and best practices, as in 2005 and 2006, showing that the global community remains committed to teaming together to defeat terrorism.